Hello, everyone. Whether you're joining us from Zoom or watching on Facebook, welcome to our program. This is Understanding the Radicalization of Youth, a conversation with Dr. Lindsay MacNeill, who is a historian at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. My name is Sophie Don. I'm the Administrative and Operations Manager for the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation in, you guessed it, Philadelphia. And I'm joined by our great partner, Sam Goldberg from the Nathan and Esther Pelz Holocaust Education Resource Center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we also have to acknowledge our great partner, Dan Prinzing from the Wasmuth Center for Human Rights in Boise, Idaho, who is unable to be with us tonight, but who is essential in planning this event, as well as the executive director of my foundation, and who cannot be with us as well, Esther Kutash. So the format for this conversation is going to be a pseudo panel where Dr. MacNeill will share some historical context, and then Sam and myself will ask Dr. MacNeill some questions that will explore this topic further. I'd like to note that today's session provides the historical context of radicalization of youth leading up to the Second World War, but there's going to be a full week, Holocaust Education Week, which will be our sixth one, actually, early in the new year, dedicated entirely to this topic. So it'll be exploring our current moment with the subject matter and with experts in the field, such as Southern Poverty Law Center, the Anti-Defamation League, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and other partner institutions, including the Nathan Esther Pelz Center and the Wasmuth Center, who we always do the Education Weeks with. So first, a little bit of background on Dr. MacNeill. She recently finished her doctorate in history at American University, where she also holds a master's in modern European history. Her dissertation focused on the policing politics in Austria from 1918 to 1955. And she's the winner of several awards and many fellowships from institutions in Austria as well as in the United States. We're very excited to have her join us to talk about this rather challenging topic. So welcome, Lindsay, and I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Sophie. Okay, we're gonna see if I achieve screen share. All right. Success?
We are in presenter mode, but yes.
Let's try just our regular mode here.
I think you can just do play from start in the left-hand corner there.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay, great. So thank you guys for having me. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm going to turn off my subtitles, maybe. How about that? Great. Okay. I'm very excited to be joining you all today to talk about this really important and, as you said, Sophie, challenging topic, the radicalization of youth in the Nazi era. And if you're watching, if you joined, you're probably thinking to yourself, ah, yes, we're going to be talking about the Hitler Youth. But that's not actually going to be our focus today. Instead, we're going to talk a little bit about the 1920s and the early 1930s, basically up until the point that Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. So really the sort of struggle for power years. And I want to start off just by defining what I'm talking about when I'm talking about radicalization. There are lots of different ways to talk about this topic, but I'm talking about what motivated people to basically commit violent acts, of even terrorist acts, on behalf of the Nazi Party and Nazi ideology. And that's why the 1920s and the early 1930s are really key. So this is before the Nazis controlled the government. And the organization that you have to talk about, if you're going to talk about this, is the SA. In German, it's the Sturmabteilung. And you've maybe heard them referred to as the brown shirts or the stormtroopers. That's the term, those are the terms we use most often in English because they wore brown uniforms. That's the brown shirt part there. And the SA was a Nazi paramilitary organization that was founded in August of 1921 and essentially was a paramilitary, a fighting league. They were out and in the streets of Germany on behalf of the Nazi Party. So their job, this is what we think of when we think of the SA most often, right? They're in uniforms, marching through the streets of Germany, maybe a crowd's watching. They look very militaristic. They were supposed to protect marches and rallies, political speakers, political events. They were sort of the muscle, basically. But they were also supposed to really represent an idea that the party wanted to convey to Germans. This idea that the party was young, manly, and oriented towards the future, right? This is a masculine, young movement that's all about where Germany is going to go. That's one of the things they hoped that the SA would show people. But that doesn't really get us to the question of radicalization yet at all, right? We know now, or if you already knew maybe, what the SA was, what the SA did, but why did people join and who joined? This is a picture of an SA troop from 1926, and the SA was a group of young men. You can see a few women in this picture as well, but the SA is young men. The average age of SA troops in about 1933 was 25. You had men as young as 17, and then of course through their 20s and into their 30s. But that's young. Those are people that we think of now as children, or certainly boys. They would be perhaps college students, that type of age group. And they were unemployed. About 60 to 80% were unemployed men, boys and men, and too young to have fought in World War I. And so you really see the SA numbers grow as unemployment grows as well. So these are young men who lack a purpose and are looking for something. They are usually in a troop. So this is a small group of young men who were an SA troop, or Sturm would have been the German, who lived together perhaps, but certainly in the same neighborhood, who hung out together, who were very closely knit. They had all kinds of nicknames for each other. They spent their free time together, and they shared a worldview. This is Horst Wessel, who becomes a very famous SA man, leading his formation through the streets of Nuremberg for the party rally in 1929. And at this point, he is 22. That's really common. The leader of these SA Sturms, these SA troops, are young men, early 20s, 21, 22, 23, leading a group of their essentially friends in various activities, trainings, marches, rallies, political events, also drunken brawls. There's lots and lots of alcohol involved in SA life in the 1920s and early 1930s. That's key. And so again, this is a propaganda image as well. Young, male, going somewhere is what this is trying to convey. One of their slogans was, "Move over, old people," right? They're very explicit about the importance that youth plays. And they're, as I said, spending a lot of time together. The SA is offering them something. It's not just a political organization, it's a community. So this is, again, of course, a propaganda photograph. You can tell by the quality of the image and how well it's staged, of Hitler speaking in the basement canteen of the Munich Brown House, which was a hostel for SA men. A hostel for SA men, maybe you've never heard of those before, but they became quite common. These young, unemployed 20-year-old men didn't want to stay with their parents necessarily, or couldn't. They moved into SA houses. The communists called them barracks, not hostels, because they did a lot of military training. And they had a canteen or cafeteria in the basement often. They had a pub associated with it, or even in the hostel. So these are people spending lots and lots and lots of time together. Of course, Hitler is very rarely there, but on the day he comes, you do your propaganda image here. And if you look at the group, some of them are so young, right? They really look like teenagers, college kids. And so the SA is giving them purpose, structure, support, and it's also giving them actual welfare. This is a soup kitchen with SA men lined up, because if you're young and employed and your only activity is the SA, you aren't necessarily making money. So you need someone to help provide you with food, housing, all of these things. This is the Great Depression as well by the time we get into 1930. And so there are more and more men who need these things, and the SA is one of the places that's providing them. In this culture, you also have the development of the sort of internal system of morality, because the radicalization that we're talking about here for youth in the Nazi movement is not an individual act, it's communal, right? That you have groups of young men joining together, committing violent acts, yelling anti-Semitic slogans, taunting people in the streets, these types of things, as a group, using nicknames, and again, very frequently drunk. And just to prove that I'm going to talk about the Hitler Youth a little bit, this is an early visit that Hitler made to an early Hitler Youth camp in 1929. So the Nazi program is very interested in these late teens, early 20s men as sort of the front lines of the movement, but they're also thinking towards the future. And in particular, they want to get even younger kids involved to then funnel them into the SA in the future and teach them ideology, Nazi ideas, military drills, all those types of things. Oops, I'm gonna go back. And then the thing that the SA is probably most famous for, if we're talking about the 1920s and early 1930s, is their violence. This is a group of men who love to get into fights, who have their special bar, and if anyone comes into their special bar, there's going to be a fight, especially if that person is another young man in a different political organization, perhaps a young communist. They also like to attack sometimes the police, sometimes Jews or civilians who they decide to identify as Jews in the streets. So you can see this is a drawing image of medics having to treat wounded SA members after one of these fights, because these are not just like fist fights, there are weapons involved. Horst Wessel, the young guy who was at the lead of that SA troop at the rally, he is famously murdered by a communist in 1929, so a little bit after that photograph was taken, and becomes a martyr for the movement, right? The symbol of an SA man killed in the fight for Nazi ideas. And I think I'm going to stop there for now, because that's, I think, the picture that you really need to understand what's going on with the SA in these early years. Young, drunk, fighters.
And it's a great segue for our first question. So you have already mentioned and touched on the antagonism between young men and young people, but young men mostly, in these different groups, that hold different political ideologies. So can you tell us a little bit about what did radicalization look like from other political groups? So how were the communists or other political groups trying to mobilize youth?
Yes, excellent. So the SA obviously is not the only, they called them fighting leagues. Actually, I was reading somewhere that this is a better translation than paramilitary, and I have to agree, right, that fighting league really captures so much more what they're about. There are other fighting leagues in the Weimar Republic. The SA's most favorite enemy are the communists, but there are others as well. I think this is a good place to talk a little bit about numbers. So perhaps, again, in our minds, the SA is a big organization, and it is. But by 1930, so this is right around the time that Horst Wessel's murdered, there were 60,000 SA men. This grows in August 1932 to 445,000. And I'm telling you this before I talk about the communists, because they're actually doing a little bit better than the SA in terms of recruitment. This is a photograph of the Red Front Fighters League, which is the name of the communists' paramilitary or fighting league. And this is from 1927. But by 1929, when the group is outlawed, they have 130,000 members. So that's more than double the SA. I had to quickly do math in my head. More than double the SA. So they're doing well, and they are recruiting especially in working class neighborhoods. They might recruit also at workplaces, and they are insisting that their logic is to defend their neighborhoods from outside attacks, especially from the Nazis, from the SA. You also have an organization called the Reichsbanner Schwarz-Rot-Gold, which is Reichsbanner black, red, yellow, or gold. And these are the colors of the Weimar Republic's flag. And that maybe gives away their purpose, which is to defend the Republic. It's created in 1924. Basically, the Republic decides it needs its own fighting league defense group out there. And the Reichsbanner really puts the other groups to shame in terms of numbers. It has about 3 million men in 1932. So that's, I can't do the math better than the SA in terms of recruiting people to join and to participate. And they're doing the same types of things, parades, rallies, defending their political events from attacks, these types of things. I believe that the Reichsbanner is a little bit older, but the communists certainly are not, right? They're also pretty young, definitely still drinking at bars, doing some of the same types of things that the Nazis are doing. And they're all fighting each other. That's really key. I think this image is kind of fantastic for how many chairs people have knocked over and have in their hands. But this is a fight not between communists and Nazis, but between communists and the Reichsbanner. And the Reichsbanner were mostly social democrats, but some other political parties as well. So you have this broader milieu, this broader scene really in the Weimar Republic, where young men can justify getting into fights and joining organizations designed to fight really whatever their ideology is, and that you then can have competition essentially between these organizations to win the young men to join them. Here you can see a cartoon sort of making fun of this from August of 1932, where it says, Germany's autarky, and then the caption that you can't see here says, what progress since 1914 when it comes to warfare, the Germans finally made themselves completely independent from abroad. So it's making fun of sort of in World War I, we fought external enemies, and now we have fully armed political camps internally. Man on the left holding the weapon up is Reichsbahn man, and then the other guy is a Nazi stormtrooper. So this is something that's so pervasive in the Weimar Republic that it's the subject of political cartoons. They don't look particularly young, right? These cartoon guys look kind of grizzled perhaps, but in fact, this was teenagers.
So that's going to lead us into our second question. And I'm using an example from Wisconsin, which is where Herc is located. So Kyle Rittenhouse was charged and recently released on bail after killing 2 protesters and injuring a third in a Black Lives Matter demonstration held in Kenosha, Wisconsin. It was discovered later that numerous pages were created in order to mobilize this group of armed citizens that self-tasked themselves with taking up arms to protect our lives and property from these BLM protesters. Rittenhouse had allegedly participated in militia training and had reportedly been in contact with a member of the Boogaloo Boys, an extremist groups with reach in Wisconsin. Despite this, Rittenhouse still claims that he acted in self-defense and that he intended to attend the protests to protect the city from chaos and looting. So using examples from history, what can be said or done at the state level to ensure that citizens are not playing army?
This is a really important and really difficult question, I think. And it's one that Germany did not really figure out, right? That they tried a lot of things. And I think that's always sort of one of the frustrating parts of studying this history. Like, it's an opportunity and it's a frustration. It's like, okay, what'd they try? Why didn't it work? And you don't really have an example of like, yes, we're sure that this will work. But here are some of the things that they tried. We don't have very many good pictures of government measures because like it's a bunch of just paperwork, but here you can see police searching an SA man for weapons as they're gathering for a rally. So you could try to use the police to basically intervene, to keep violence from breaking out, or in this case, to keep there from being weapons. And then here's a second image of the same thing, policemen searching these young guys for weapons. But that requires a lot of manpower to do that successfully. So you also have the government attempting to figure out how to balance the fact that they are a democracy, that there are certain freedoms of speech, assembly, these types of things that come with being a democracy, and to figure out how to simultaneously put in restrictions to stop these brawls and this political violence. The government at the federal level, but and also at state levels, tried banning events, tried to put in a pause, right? They'd say, okay, we've had a very tense election. Let's put in a 30-day ban on any sort of political meeting, or a ban on wearing uniforms. And then what you would see happen is they would either just wait out the ban and then start everything up again, or you would have them basically refuse to participate, refuse to follow the guidelines. One of their favorite things was, okay, the uniforms are banned, but we're going to just all wear the same outfit and walk through the streets, right? So then it's like, okay, well, what's the point in having banned the uniform then, if they're just going to still manage to display their loyalty to this movement, to this cause? And you have some tension developing in the Weimar Republic between how the federal government, which was under von Papen by 1932, and is quite conservative, how they are reacting versus how state governments are reacting. The best example is the state of Prussia, which was run by Social Democrats for most of this era. And Prussia might say, okay, we're going to be really harsh. We're going to implement all of these bans. We're going to totally ban the SA from even existing. But if that doesn't happen also at a federal level, then you have the issue of crossing state lines. Right? So you have a lot of different governments trying to come up with ideas while not restricting people's rights too much. One thing that happens is they try to ban civil servants from being members of these radical organizations. And that also doesn't particularly work, right? You have lots of workarounds develop, new organizations form that aren't banned, that type of thing. I think I'll stop there. It's a very unsatisfying answer, but it's like they did try things, which maybe we don't always know.
I was muted, sorry. For our next question, so we know that at this time there's an increase in technological abilities. So with film booming and microphones, and what was the impact with that technology on reaching youth? So how are those methods utilized to target young people?
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting when you're talking about young people, and especially in the SA or in the Hitler Youth and the new technology, is that they're both the target of the technology and then also the people who are then deploying that technology on behalf of the Nazi movement. So it's like kind of a cycle going on. And I know that a picture of people handing out pieces of paper does not seem like it could possibly be technology, but it is, right? They're handing out mass-produced campaign literature, campaign leaflets to people on the street. So they're responsible for taking this technological advancement of mass-produced, easily cheap printed materials and distributing it on the streets. This is also maybe one of my favorite pictures because we don't really think of bicycles as technology, but again, they of course they're new. And here you have a bunch of SA men who have taped or painted an electoral message on their backs, biking through the streets, trying to get people to vote for list 10, which means vote for the Nazis. And this would have been a spectacle, right? This would have been something that people stopped and watched and maybe thought was cool or interesting. I don't know what a 2020 equivalent is, maybe Scooter colors, I don't know, something, right, where it seems cool and young and a way to spread the message. You also have the essay featured on postcards. These are two, both from 1932, each with a stormtrooper. One of them has Hitler and a crowd, but you can see some photographic technology is being used here to superimpose all of these images. And then the guy over the mountain as well. That the essay is a feature and supposed to attract more people like that to the party. That sort of, again, young, masculine, moving forward idea gets incorporated not just into the actions of the essay on the street, but then into propaganda that then the essay itself is distributing. You also have this is from a little bit later, from 1935, but you have the Stürmer display boxes, which were put up in the center of town. So anybody walking by could stop and read this very disgustingly anti-Semitic magazine. It had drawings, cartoons, ads, articles that you could stop and read and learn Nazi ideology, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and those types of things. And again, very publicly displayed. Again, pretty new, actually, to have things like this publicly displayed on the streets, changed out rapidly. And then here you can see lots of pretty young people looking at that. If you're a parent who didn't want your kid to see this, right, and you didn't maybe get Der Stürmer mailed to you, they would still have had access to it publicly on the streets of Germany. Here's another similar image, but what I really like about this one is that you can see lots of different pieces of propaganda displayed here together, again, on the streets. And what is really interesting about this for the Weimar Republic, this is later from 1937, but would have existed earlier during the Weimar Republic, is that it's actually the democracy that allows this burst of freedom of expression, but in the form of posters and display of advertising and newspapers. That one of the things people noticed about living in the Weimar Republic was that there was media everywhere. They called them posters. They would like paste these things on walls illegally, illegal pasters, or on official news columns. And you were just bombarded with images and advertising and political ideas in ways that you hadn't been before. So that's both technological and political there. The essay also then is doing symbolic acts, sort of performing for the camera, because cameras are, by the 20s and early 30s, much more common. You know, anybody, not anybody, but lots of people could have one and carry it around with them pretty easily. And so here you can see a group of SA men burning the flag of the Weimar Republic on the streets of Berlin, like for the camera. They're all sort of making direct eye contact, so that this propaganda act then becomes something that people all over Germany and all over the world could see. That's especially true with images from the April 1st boycott. Again, we're in the Nazi regime era by this point. And one of the things that's so interesting to me about these pictures is they're very high quality, right? This is not taken by someone by accident. This is very clearly staged to deliver a message. You know, there's lots of care being set up to take this photograph. The posters they're holding, you see them in many different pictures. They're mass produced. In fact, here you can see them being handed out to different SA men to go paste on walls or to go carry throughout the city. This guy looks like he is 14, though he must be older, and he is doing his job here, not only of pasting propaganda up on the walls, but also of posing for the picture for the newspaper or for the film reel, perhaps. These guys didn't get the fancy mass-produced sign, but somebody has still painted them a sign here. It says, "Fight against department stores." And they're doing the physical work here of intimidation, not technological, but very important in terms of what these young boys are up to. Here they're using a car. That's also, of course, technology for the early 1930s. And in many cases, they would have driven around also with a loudspeaker on the car, blasting Nazi messaging. The magnification of sound is something that's new in the 20s and 30s. And so the Nazis really start to use that in big ways as they're trying to come to power and then in the regime itself. So you have young men who have been radicalized doing this, calling upon and maybe appealing to other people who might be thinking, wow, like, look, they're driving by in this car with this loudspeaker, or they're biking by, or they're, you know, in the midst doing all of these exciting new things. Again, this isn't particularly technological, but I think it's kind of striking how young this group of people is. They are carrying the piles of un-German literature to throw into the bonfire for the organized book burning. And here these guys got to use the car again, a truck of some sort, to remove the materials they've confiscated and then add them to the bonfire. I'm gonna leave it there just to say that as an organization, the SA is really most important in this era, in this rise to power and in the first year and a half maybe of the regime. And they're important because they are all about getting people to mobilize and eventually then to radicalize to violent acts. They are through this camaraderie, male bonding, drinking, brawling, living together kind of environment, getting people to join and then to go be a visible presence on Germany's streets, to make the Nazi movement seem big, powerful, young, and forward-looking. And that once the Nazi regime comes to power, you really have a whole different set of tasks. And that's when you have other organizations become much more important. So that's when the Hitler Youth would become more key here to the Nazi plans for the youth. And of course, also the propaganda ministry as well.
Okay, yeah, I have a next question that I think came from Dan at the Wassmuth Center. So thinking about this today, how does social media play a role in reaching and radicalizing youth?
I think that social media in some ways is filling the roles that the SA men found in their like clubhouses, that online on social media, you can make a community, or you can make a community with its internal set of rules, with nicknames, with its own morality and its own logic. I think where we see a big difference though is of course that there's an anonymity to being online, right? You might not know other people's names in these organizations. And that when somebody takes an action inspired by radicalization online, it seems to often be something that they're doing relatively solo, right? That the example you gave earlier, Sam, of Kyle Rittenhouse, he had been sort of touched by all of these different groups, but they're kind of on his own, or he's making decisions individually. And with the SA, we see a lot more communal action, right? Like a group going out together from the hostel or from the bar into the street. And that social media doesn't have that step. It's hard to go from the chat or from the platform to real life, but it doesn't mean that it's not very risky, because I think the anonymity there means that you aren't having that social judgment, that like a lot of these guys talk about like, oh, my family disowned me for joining the SA, maybe, right? Like that's not going to necessarily happen, because when it's online, it's not for sure that your parents would know, for example. So I think the danger, some of the dangers and some of the reasons that people found these groups appealing overlap, but with social media, it's really a new frontier in some ways.
Thank you, Lindsay, so much for being with us tonight. And thank you to everyone watching for this evening's program. And then just briefly, if you haven't already, please take a moment to participate in the please take a moment to fill out the Eventbrite registration form. The link can be found on our event page, and registration will be open for up to 2 weeks after this program. And then if you're an educator, you'll be asked to participate in a survey, completely optional. The survey is part of an impact assessment being conducted by the Nathan and Esther Pelz Holocaust Education Resource Center. And this optional survey is just designed to help us measure the impact of HERC's educational programs. The feedback is completely anonymous, and it will not influence your relationship with HERC. If you consent to this survey, someone with HJ Impact will be in touch. And then, as Sophie mentioned at the beginning of this program, HERC, the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation, and the Wasmuth Center for Human Rights will partner again at the end of January for a full week of programs on this topic. We hope that you will return to the conversation then. Thank you again, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Sam. Again, if you're a Facebook viewer, you can head over to that Eventbrite page. If you're on Zoom, you're already good. But thank you all for coming and joining us this evening, and have a great rest of your night.